Hi, it's Dr. Betty Robin with the Dentistry Rising podcast. I'm an attorney, a dentist, and a practice cell broker. This podcast is my brainchild to help inspire, motivate, and educate dentists to create the practices and lives they want. I've personally owned 3 practices and worked with thousands of dentists in my capacity as their broker or attorney. I want to put my expertise to work for you and help you find the success you want. After all, you're my peeps. Let's get going. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about leases because I keep getting a lot of questions from you guys on your leases. And my assistant Skye has a lot of questions too, so I thought I would spend this podcast time answering her questions with the hope that it helps you guys too. So welcome, Skye.
Thank you, Dr. Betty Robin. So I know there are leases involved with all the sales that we do and that you sometimes do leases for other doctors. How do you know what to ask when you're start negotiating for the lease?
Well, it depends on who I'm representing and who I'm dealing with as to the space. As to who, most of our clients are sellers whose practices I have listed. So in that case, I'm primarily trying to get them out of the lease. But if it is a buyer from another brokerage office or someone that just wants to negotiate the lease, their existing lease or a new lease, then that's an entirely different scenario. Now, the who on the space would be whether I'm talking to an attorney or whether I'm talking to a commercial broker.
Got it. So why is it different if you're doing it for someone who has listed their practice with you compared to a buyer?
Well, with a seller, the only thing I'm really concerned about is getting them out of their lease and stopping the liability they have under their lease. Because under state law, they would continue to have liability under the lease and exercised options unless that's terminated. So it's really important to get sellers out of their lease. But with a buyer, I'm worried about a buyer or just someone getting a new lease or moving, their practice to another location. Then you have to worry about every single term of the lease. And I have to read the whole lease and negotiate the terms. Much more complicated than with the seller, where I have one goal, get them out of the lease. Whereas with the buyer, I have the goal of getting them the least expensive and best lease that I possibly can. So it's a lot more work when you're representing a buyer or someone going new into a space.
And why is it different if you're talking to a commercial broker or if you're talking to an attorney? Don't you basically want the same thing?
Well, I do want the same thing, but I'm talking to people at different levels. With a commercial broker, I'm primarily talking money, both the lease per square foot or per year and the CAM amount. And I'm talking the term of the lease. Now, commercial brokers get pretty concerned about the length of the term of the lease because that's how they get paid. They're getting paid on the total amount of commitment they get from someone, both in terms of the rate and whether it's a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease. Commercial brokers make a lot more money on a 10-year lease than they would a 5-year lease with an option in most cases. So commercial brokers are focused on getting someone interested in the space, getting the highest rent rate possible, and getting the longest term possible in most cases. Now, with an attorney, it's entirely different. Most attorneys are working for a flat fee for a lease, which is considerably less than the broker is making, and they're talking about the fine points of the lease. So again, very different conversations. With big commercial landlords, usually will talk to both people. You'll talk to a commercial broker, and when we get a letter of intent ironed out, then I'll talk to their attorney on the fine points. If it's a smaller landlord, there may be only an attorney involved, or sometimes only a commercial broker involved. So different people with different levels of expertise.
And then is it realistic to think you're going to get what changes you asked for from a property owner?
Well, yes and no. So I find the best way to start, because I'm working with people I don't know and probably will never work with again. So I don't have a past history of what they usually agree to or don't agree to. So I usually pick the 3 to 5 most important things and start there. So my list of probably most important things, depending on the lease, is first the price. Always the price. You've always got to work on the money. Second, the CAM and what's included in the CAM. And it's important with the CAM to make sure that you're only paying the portion of the space you occupy, and you don't want the CAM to be, based on an 80 or 90% occupancy. You want it to be based on 100% occupancy. So you're only paying your fair portion, the percent you occupy. What's included in the CAM is important too. I've talked about that in other podcasts, but like you want to negotiate out reserves, high management fees, and a lot of other things. Third, you never want to have a relocation clause. Dental offices aren't like law offices or insurance offices where you can pick up a desk and move your internet and go somewhere else. With the dental office, someone at some point probably paid close to $200,000 putting all the plumbing in, putting all the electrical in, and it's just not easy to move. And it's not only the plumbing and electrical, it's also the insurance contracts, because insurance contracts are many times not easily movable, particularly if you're talking Denti-Cal or HMO contracts. So there's a lot of things involved in moving a dental office, and it's certainly nothing that can be done quickly. And I think really all relocation clauses should be out. Fourth, I'm really concerned about the assignment and subletting clauses. Now, assignment and subletting are different things. Assignment is when somebody takes over your entire space, whereas subletting is you're renting them a room or subletting them an operatory or two. A lot of subletting clauses have the landlord get the money that you get, from the rent, or get half of it or some percent of it. So you want to be sure what that involves, especially if you're considering hiring specialists or other dentists in your space. The assignment clause usually only becomes important if you want to sell your practice. So someone can take over your lease. Problematic things in the assignment clause can be that the person is required to have as many personal assets as you do, which is kind of unrealistic to expect somebody out of school 5 years to have millions of dollars that you may have in your retirement plan when you're ready to retire. So lots of problems potentially with an assignment clause and a subletting clause that you want to negotiate. On the assignment clause too, so once in a while, not as common now as it used to be, the landlord requires a percent of the sale proceeds, which can be devastating. If you have to pay 20% of your proceeds of $1 million, that would be $200,000 to a landlord. So that needs to come out. And lastly, I get really concerned that options that are attached to the lease are assignable to a new buyer and are not personal. A lot of options say they're personal to the current lessee or tenant. So you want them to not be personal. If the landlord accepts the assignment, then the option should transfer with the lease. So that's usually where I start. If I get through that pretty well and we end up with reasonable resolutions, then I usually go pick another 4 to 6 things I want to talk about. Some of those things are like damage and destruction clause, returning the suite to a vanilla shell condition, which means taking everything out if you were to move out. Some areas, eminent domain is an issue. I mean, there's lots of stuff in a lease, and you as a potential tenant should read every single line of the lease, and your attorney definitely should as well. But I have found if I overwhelm the broker or the attorney with changes, they may just say this is too much work and they just say no to everything. So I usually kind of do it in the piecemeal fashion, picking 3 to 5 things each time and just working my way through the whole lease as long as we're continuing a conversation. Now, the landlord always has the upper hand, I would say, in the lease because they own the building. And in most cases, it's a multi-million dollar asset to them. So with some people, you have more negotiating power than you do with others. And, it can also depend on how many vacancies they have, how much they want to rent it. But you'll never probably get a lease that you're 100% love. So you just have to pick the most problematic things and work on those and solve them and then make a decision if you want to go forward.
Perfect. Makes sense. Thank you so much for answering my questions today.
Well, thank you. And thank you for being interested enough in asking. And I hope that was helpful also to our listeners. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Dentistry Rising podcast, Dr. Betty Robin. Please subscribe on iTunes so we can get better and better at helping you make your practice dreams come true.